What is happening, folks? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Of course, this is one of the biggest episodes in recent years. Today was one of the biggest days in recent Buffalo Bills history. I'm going to break down what I will remember always as the biggest roster purge day in recent Buffalo Bills history, as the Bills have moved on from franchise cornerstones Jordan Poyer, Tre White, and Mitch Morse. 3 captains cut in one day. We haven't seen this in quite some time. I'm going to break it down. We'll be right back. All right, so as I said from the jump, this is one of the biggest days in recent Buffalo Bills history. And of course, I want your takeaways within this podcast. I want your takes on everything that went on today at One Bills Drive. It was a very tough day for a lot of Bills fans, not necessarily myself. And I tell you why. This was a day that I came to expect. This was a day that I came to know and understand very well. And it's going to sound silly because it comes from a perspective that is not quite reality. But as big of a football fan as I am, I'm an even bigger Madden player. I love Madden. It's one of my favorite games out there. Each and every year I buy it, no matter how little it changes. And when you choose the Buffalo Bills in Madden, NFL 24, and you go into year 2 of their franchise, this team is in salary cap hell. You have to make tough decisions with the roster in year 2 in order to get from under 40 to 0. And those decisions, as realistic as that game is, with the realistic contracts of those players that were cut today, those are oftentimes the players that, oddly enough, I move on from. Jordan Poyer, Tre White, Mitch Morse, Micah Hyde looks like he could be testing the market, could be potentially retiring. But those are the players that I typically move on from. And I tell you this, what's hard about today is not the fact that Jordan Poyer was cut. We understand why Jordan Poyer was cut, right? The concoction group of players that were cut due to 3 reasons: age, injury, or ineffectiveness, or lack of effectiveness consistently. Age, Jordan Poyer. Injury, Tre White. Age and a little bit of injury, Mitch Morse. Along the last couple of years, he had some concussion-related issues, but more so salary, I think, from Mitch Morse. In the case of Deonte Harty, he'd only signed a 1-year deal. He was an easy cut, easy guy to move on from. 1 year left on his contract and whatnot. You can move on from that, get the salary back, and Siran Neal. But what players can you move on from that can create salary cap space, and what players can you justify moving on from to your fan base for the reasons that I mentioned: age, injury, and ineffectiveness, lack of consistency. Siran Neal being another player that was cut that's been a big part of the special teams aspect of this Buffalo Bills team, which does matter. Special teams, of course, does matter. But to me, cutting these players is tough. Cutting a guy like Jordan Poyer, who had been here for 7 years, who had helped, bring the culture that has been here the last 7 years here. I think he was one of those first foundational pieces, along with Micah Hyde, along with Tre White. Oddly enough, at that time, this team was built from the back end of their secondary inward. Defensively, offense was a mess when Sean McDermott took the reins of the head coaching position as the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills in 2017. Truthfully, Jordan Poyer cut cap savings. Jordan Poyer cut. How does that look to the other 31 teams in the NFL? Well, Buffalo gave him an opportunity to be picked up by any team of his choosing among the teams that bid for his services. If in fact he does continue to play, which I think he will for another year, with one last year with what was his what will be his last team. Tre White, obviously, he had suffered 2 devastating leg injuries in as many as 3 seasons. This is actually one that you're looking at it from a financial standpoint. There's not much of a savings aspect to this one as much as there is dead money as well. It's kind of like you're not breaking even, but you're a little over, a couple $1,000,000 here. And I'll tell you guys this, I'm not going to bore anybody, as most shows have, with the cap situation. All in all, today's moves of these 5 players helped Buffalo save $25 million off their salary cap, including Tre White onto that mix. Wouldn't take place until June 1st, as he's a post-June designation cut. So these moves had to be made, and this proves the fact that this is a cruel business. It really is. The NFL just can chew you up and it can spit you right out, no matter who you are. I mean, if Tom Brady could go from the Patriots to the Bucs, if Peyton Manning can get cut from the Colts and go to the Denver Broncos, nobody's safe. I think I learned that in those instances as well, the Brett Favre saga and all that. You think that those guys would be buried in those colors. You'd think that those guys would spend, their not only their careers, but their post-retirement years. We're not in the era of the Dan Marinos, the Jim Kellys, the Troy Palomalus. We're not in that era anymore. This free agency era is as active as any. And a lot of it has to do with, case in point, something that was brought up on the last podcast that I did, the amount of money that the salary cap has gone up allows teams to not only spend more, but it allows players to go out, test their market more, and make more money. Now, in this case, these players, I'm not sure what their market is going to be. I don't think it's going to be a strong one. In the case of Poyer last year, he had tested the market and came right back to Buffalo. There wasn't really much out there for him. Tre White, what, if any, market will Tre White have coming off of the injuries that he's coming off of? And Mitch Morse, I think there'll be a pretty healthy market for him, but will it be a 1-2 year deal? More likely than not. Deonte Harty, slot guy, wide receiver 4, not nearly as sought after as, Gabe Davis, for example, will be in free agency as the most sought after wide receiver free agent in the NFL. Now that Mike Evans got extended, now that Michael Pittman got tagged, T. Higgins got tagged as well, franchise tag, that is. So Gabe Davis is going to be in high demand by the other 31 teams in the NFL. Buffalo will not be in that sweepstakes unless we got some more stuff cooking, which today was a really interesting day. The order in which today happened was not by design, or was not by design, was not coincidence. It was not. The way this news trickled through, it was calculated. It was the one guy that we're going to get out in the market first. Guy that we have a lot of respect for, a guy that's done a lot for this team, a guy that's been a pillar of the community, Jordan Poyer, in the struggles that he has had in his life, kind of paying it forward and helping people through their own. I don't have anything bad to say about him. Can't say anything bad about Jordan Poyer. So you get him out there first. You let him get his market going. Reach out to those other teams. Let him, go out and do that. Mitch Morse was the next one that I had heard. And then as I am in the process of running some errands, I get a confirmation that Tre White is on the move. And that made me go, this was a day Brandon Beane woke up and said, I got 1 week left to get to the cap. It's time to make these moves now. The time is now to get ahead of it, to get closer to making other moves. And all those moves that were made were all kind of in one lump hour, it felt like. And then other moves came. Additions, re-signings, as the Bills announced today that not only did they release 5 players, but they signed backup quarterback Mitchell Trubisky again. Mitchell Trubisky's back in Buffalo. I know a lot of people are not for that. To me, he's a backup quarterback. I hope he never has to play. I hope it never matters. Hope the move never matters, quite frankly. Just as much as Kyle Allen mattered or didn't matter last year to Buffalo's team, because he didn't play. You already have one of the best quarterbacks on earth. As long as he's healthy, the Mitch Trubisky move or whoever the backup is really doesn't matter. Just like Jim Sorgi didn't matter. Just like Ryan Mallett didn't matter when they were backing up TB12 and or Peyton Manning. So, and coming out of this, you're wondering, is Jordan Poyer going to be gone as well as Micah Hyde? And if that's the case, the only safety that's under contract is Damar Hamlin, who's talking about how he wants to play for the Steelers at some point in his career. And I think that is another topic for another day. I'm not mad at that. A lot of people got mad at that. I could care less. And I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way. I'm saying it with all due respect. It's not really the headline that would get my juices flowing anyway. If Damar Hamlin left the team, I wouldn't really be upset about it. I'd just say, okay, whatever, move on. Signing Taylor Rapp to a 3-year deal worth up to $15 million to keep him here to be a starting safety for the Bills, that matters to me. That's a big deal. So this was a good start to get things going here. And yeah, I've been very critical of one player in particular, and you guys know who that is. If you don't, I'll tell you. And I got to type the headline because I forgot to do that. So pardon me if you're typing. But it's no secret I've been critical of Von Miller. And finally, on the 2 to 3 year spectrum that we're on here, journey-wise, for Von Miller does the right thing. Von Miller does the right thing. He says, I'm going to restructure this. I'll let you guys rework this to where I got $1.5 million base salary. I got $7 million in my bonus and incentives that make this as much as potentially $20 million for this upcoming year. We're just focusing on this season. Thank you. Finally helped us clear $9 million in salary cap. So now the Bills will be a little bit over the zero line post June 1st. If you were kind of adding all them up as of right now, that's where they'd be, about $5-6 million above zero. And that's a hell of a lot better than $40 million under. So Brandon Beane is moving and shaking. Now, talking about what this does in terms of this roster purge, what this does is take things to another question for me. I think it's the biggest question that pertains to not, we just, we're going to be without Jordan Poyer. We're not going to have Jordan. Sports move on. Sports change. Teams move on. Sports move on. It's a part of the game. These guys were here for 6-7 years. So that doesn't happen very often. At some point, it's going to come to an end. It's going to come to an end at some point, hopefully not anytime soon, for Josh Allen as well, whether it's in 10 years or 8 years. We'll hang him up and say, my time's over, but that's not happening anytime soon. And when I look at what moves could come from this, what does this mean? What does it mean for the Buffalo Bills draft plans? Releasing Jordan Poyer, releasing Tre White, releasing Mitch Morse, 3 captains. What does it change? Does it change anything? How will they attack the changes? How will Brandon Beane attack how to change, how to replace, move on, how to bring in new bodies? There's all this cap clearing moves made to obviously get not only ahead of the cap so that they can sign their draft picks that they'll be drafting come April, but to be more free agent players than what people expected. Now, I'll tell you this. I've looked at the free agent class very closely, and a lot of the guys that have been free agents, that were slated to be free agents, even looking at that list in 2023, are going to be free agents, obviously heading into 2024 because they didn't re-sign. Then you've added some guys to that mix that you didn't expect to be free agents, but those are the Baker Mayfields. Those are the Chris Joneses. Those are the Christian Wilkins type players that I don't see the Bills going after or having the situation to go after those players. Are there a lot of guys out there that I think the Bills should go after in free agency? There's really not many. But the only ones that are out there are the ones that are at the position that I think the Bills should address via the draft. So obviously you're going to use free agency. You got to get to at least 2 to 4 guys in free agency, at least, I think. Each team kind of does that on their own. But then, obviously, come draft time, the team has 11 picks because they just traded Ryan Bates to the Chicago Bears yesterday for a 5th-round pick. Then they cut Mitch Morse the next day. So you're 2 less offensive linemen than what you were at 48 hours ago. One of them was your starting center for 5-6 years. So I'd like to think that they have a plan there. And anyone that is anyone is looking at their team and saying, okay, well, let's look at their team. Who do they have? And what could they do to kind of fix that? They had re-signed David Edwards to a 2-year deal with up to $6 million. More likely than not, he's going to be at guard. Connor McGovern is going to be at center. So they have replacement options in-house. Am I as confident about that as most? I'm not. I don't like replacing guys in-house. Usually those guys were backups for a reason. David Edwards was a backup for a reason last year. But David Edwards started in L.A. with the Rams for a few seasons, and they just didn't re-sign him, whether that was salary cap issue or something else. Chose to go in a different direction. Buffalo brings him in. They're able to say, hey, this is a former starter. We're going to ice him for a year. Maybe this will come back to us and we'll be able to revisit him starting. Then you have guys that nobody really knows about outside of the training camp nuts like myself who look at the team and say, who are some players that are like on the underbelly of the roster that could come up and be a tackle or could come up and be a guard? And that'd be Alec Anderson, who was an undrafted free agent in 2022, who could be a part of their offensive line plans. UCLA offensive lineman, was pretty solid in college, just didn't get drafted. Offensive line, there's a lot of offensive linemen that get drafted late that end up being starters. Buffalo had one a few years back that they inexplicably traded Wyatt Teller to Cleveland. He's one of the best guards in all of football. So he was drafted in the 5th round. So, I would say if there was one move that shocked me more than any, it was the Mitch Morse release. And I think of it as this. They trade Ryan Bates away. You'd think, okay, well, Morse should be either restructured, should be extended, or he's at least in their plans for 2024. And then the next day, Morse is cut. I think the situation got to be Brandon Beane was going to do whatever it took to try to keep as many of those guys as he could. And the avalanche of restructuring is just becoming too much. And they had to cut ways with those guys. And I know for a fact that Tre White has been in Orchard Park trying to rehab from this injury since his season ended. And I know that the Bills have one of the best medical teams in all of the NFL. You know, player suffers an injury, the Bills are top-notch in their ability to help a player rehab with some of the local doctors that we have around here. I go back to when Kevin Everett suffered his injury, obviously, where he was paralyzed. We had a local guy, Andrew Cappuccino, did his surgery. The guy walks. The guy is able to, walk and live his day-to-day life. No one thought he would, and that's because of one of our local doctors in this community. So they tried to do everything they could to get a grasp on how long it was going to be for him to get back to playing shape, playing days. And I just don't think there was a pathway to that. And if there was, I think they would have worked something out on a restructured deal, but there wasn't. And I think that's why Tre White was cut. And I don't know this for certain, but I would think that is a pretty safe assumption on my part, given that he had spent X amount of months, X amount of weeks trying to rehab with Matt Milano, by the way, and Tre White just couldn't get it going, couldn't get it worked out, even after the surgery that he had, which they had said was a success. But that type of injury is not one that's kind to football players. That type of injury is hard for any human to endure, let alone one that is in immaculate physical condition like Tre'Davious White is. So, I suffer an injury like that. There's no playing anything for me. There's no doing any. There's a long rehab process if somebody like me suffered an injury like that. Tre White maybe back out on his feet, but not able to play at the level that they had hoped. Not further along enough at the level that they had hoped. So, I look at this and, yeah, it's a sad day. It shows that with these guys, to me, what's the most sad part about the whole thing is that they didn't get it done. Is that Jordan Poyer, as great as he was, they didn't get to the Super Bowl. Tre White, as great as he was prior to the injuries, he didn't get to a Super Bowl. Mitch Morse, that's a huge loss for Josh Allen. Josh Allen's played with Mitch Morse the majority of his career, and your center is a huge deal as a quarterback. You could just ask Jim Kelly about Kent Hall, playing with him his whole career. You don't get that opportunity mostly as a quarterback. Jeff Saturdays, those guys, they don't grow on trees. So Jason Kelsey, perfect example. Those guys don't just come around. They're very few and far between at that position that play at that high of a level. And I thought Mitch Morse actually had the best year of his career last year. I thought the Buffalo Bills offensive line was the best I had ever seen under the Josh Allen era at the very least. He was sacked only 24 times last year in 17 games. So you do the math. A lot of that has to do with the ability of Allen, the talent of Allen to be able to move in and out of the pocket. But, man, it's going to be a different looking team. It's going to be a younger team. It's going to be a cheaper team, essentially, with a lot of rookie contracts. But now you're wondering, with more quote-unquote positions of need now, without some of these starters, how many guys are going to rely to step up and take that spot? Not just the David Edwards openings, not just Connor McGovern manning the center position, but you're going to hope that Kyer Elam bounces back and plays more reps at the corner position in wake of Tre White. Are you going to hope that Christian Benford makes that next step and gets to that next level? I'd like to get to some of the comments too on this. So let's get to that. Let's get to some comments. I see comments from a lot of different people. So let's go to, I'm going to pull this up on my phone because my Facebook was down, right? Facebook was down for like 3 hours. Couldn't access it on my laptop and still can't. I can only access it on my phone, which is really weird. So Shane Courtney says, and Shane, hey, Dynasty League talk here. Dawson Knox is on the trade block. So if you're interested, let me know. I feel Trubisky is better than Kyle Allen as backup to Josh. I would agree with that. I was in the training camp, first few practices. I did not like what I saw from Kyle Allen. He was either really rusty or just really bad. Also, the red and blue scrimmage, I didn't like what I saw from Kyle Allen. So cool that Trubisky is back. So there it is. Shane also says, fill some depth via free agency and address the major holes in the draft. I think today does make an entire interior offensive lineman possible earlier than it may have been as far as the draft. I'm assuming is what Shane means by that they could potentially draft an offensive lineman and go from there. It says there's 16 comments, but I only see like 7. So I don't know what I'm doing here. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. One comment here on my Facebook page. Stephen Woods says, Mitch Morse, not Mitch Trubisky. Poyer, much love. Always a great Buffalo Bill in my mind. Everyone else can go. Save the cap. Get fresh legs. Let's go. I like that. And Paul Schumacher tuning in as always. Greatly appreciate his support. Always love chatting Bills football with Paul. So I think it's pretty likely that wide receiver is still the apple of Brandon Beane's eye. I could not foresee Buffalo foregoing to take someone at that position in the first round. That's just me. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my approach. I would be going into this draft with tunnel vision as Brandon Beane and hoping that we can get a very good wide receiver 2 potentially that could potentially turn into a wide receiver 1 out of this draft. Who would those guys be? They'd be Brian Thomas Jr., they'd be Adonai Mitchell, they'd be Roma Dunze. One of those 3 guys, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors will be the first 2 off the board in the draft as top 6 picks. And then beyond that, Roma Dunze, I think, is a top 10, top 12 at the latest. And then obviously from there, that's where things can get shaken and moving. The Bills pick 28th. I think they could move into the teens to go and get a wideout with the picks that they do have. A couple, spots moving up. Do they trade next year's 3rd or 4th and then 5th this year to move up 12 spots? Something like that. So don't be shocked if that does happen. Don't be shocked if it doesn't, but I'd like to think that we live in a world where Brandon Beane recognizes the need to get Josh Allen ammo on rookie contracts because Josh Allen's certainly not on a rookie contract. So I'm reading a lot, too, about Josh Allen restructuring his deal to get additional savings for the Bills, $23 million in additional savings. I don't know if that is like a steadfast, locked-in possibility. But, hey, if Josh Allen does that, I think it shows a lot about who Josh Allen is as a player and as a leader and as a person. that they got to make this team better for him to get to the championship. And unfortunately, the way that it was not good enough. And that's the part that is hard to wrap my head around, because these guys did so well, but they could not get over that hump of either the Chiefs or the Bengals the last 4 years in the playoffs. So that's just the way it is, and that's how history will remember it as of now. They got to be on the right side of history, of course, and kind of go from there. Paul Schumacher says defensive tackles and centers coming out of the draft that you might think that the Bills will look at. I know that there's two guys that I really like. One of them is a defensive tackle from Texas. I think his last name is Sweat, oddly enough. And then there was another one out of Missouri that I really liked as well. And I don't have the names in front of me right now, but I will tell you that if you were to look at any mock draft or anything like that, those players are not first-round guys. So with the exception of Sweat, he could potentially be one. But outside of that, defensive tackle-wise, I think he's the only one that's worthy of that spotting of a first-round pick in the 20s. And there's guys that are far out of the Bills' range that'll go at that position too, or at the defensive positions that they just won't be able to draft. They won't be there by the time the Bills pick, whether they trade up or not. It's like that top 15, and there's like that 15 to 25, and there's 26 to 32. Like the tier that they're in, 26 to 32, obviously kind of has its own strengths compared to the others. Centers, there's a few that are listed early in the second, mid-second. So order could be wide receiver in the first, could be safety in the second, or offensive lineman in the second, and then safety in the third. There's a guy, Kitchens, out of the U that I really like. Believe he went to Miami, either Miami or the Florida Gators. I always get the colors mixed up with those two, but I am really thinking that, oddly enough, as frustrating as it is that the Bills had to move on from plenty of, difference makers over the years, they are in a unique situation. And it's the fact that, they have a lot of needs, but those needs can be filled through the draft, because the positions of weakness for the Bills, or positions that they need to add to, are positions of depth, positions of strength in this draft. And that's pretty rare to find yourself in that kind of circumstance. Usually teams that need stuff in the draft can't quite find it because the depth is just not there. But on the flip side of that, the 31 other teams know that this draft's got a good wide receiver class. It's got some good corners, some good safeties, some good D tackles. Those are all positions that Buffalo could use. And you know what? I'm going to throw this out there too. As far as just NFL draft fodder for Bills fans, don't be shocked at running back. Don't be shocked if the Bills take a running back in the mid-rounds, third or fourth round. I would not be shocked. They've interviewed quite a lot of running backs. They've interviewed more wideouts than any other team in the league. And they've also interviewed some safeties. And that's a huge position in Sean McDermott's defense that they have to get right. But are you going to be able to get it right the way they did before? That does not happen often. So I have to send a shout out, of course, to the two guys that really helped make these last 7 years of Bills football that much more fun. Big shout out to Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer for the last 7 years that they played here. 7-8 years, however long it's been. I'm losing track of time, but 2017 to 2024, it's been a hell of a run for two players to man two positions alongside one another. In the case of Micah Hyde, strong. In the case of Jordan Poyer, free. Man, it has been a great, great run for you two. And I thank you guys for being awesome representatives of the Buffalo Bills. All around great players. Made a lot of great memories for Buffalo Bills fans everywhere. All sorts of plays made. Man, I'm tearing up. I am. I did not expect to tear up, but I am. And I think a lot of it has to do with knowing how good these guys were. Not just on the field, but off the field. That's something that I think it was. What was the quote? I'm going to find it because it's going to bother me. John Wooden. I've been reading a lot about John Wooden. And John Wooden had a quote about character. The true test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching. Be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation rather, is merely what others think you are. That's deep. And I think a lot of that can be related to Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, from the sense that when they got here, they weren't much to talk about. Micah Hyde had started a couple years in Green Bay. They let him go. Aaron Rodgers said, that's one that we shouldn't have let happen. Everyone's like, what? He's just Micah Hyde, whatever. Goes on to do what he did in Buffalo. Jordan Poyer was a backup safety, like strictly a backup safety. He was not a starter. And he has this wonderful career in Buffalo, shows quite a lot of what he's capable of early as a guy that at one point you'd say, oh, with the Bills and Jordan Poyer, they're 9-1. Without Jordan Poyer, they're 0-4 or whatever it was when he was hurt the one year. He was incredible for this team. And as was Micah Hyde, both equal in their ability to make dynamic plays in big moments, and to do so at a level that nobody else was on. No other there was no two safeties on any one team these last 7 years like Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. There just wasn't. And I think a lot of the credit does go to Josh Allen. But what Hyde and Poyer did for the Bills predates Josh Allen. They were here a year before he was. So I think, they're two players that'll be dearly missed. They're two players that I think will take their place on the Bills Wall of Fame eventually. There's a lot of guys that are overdue for that. Eric Moulds being one of them. And I think Kyle Williams being another. I'd throw Aaron Schobel out there. Who else would I throw out there? I'd throw Eric Wood up there, to be honest. I really would. There's a lot of guys that were great Bills. Fred Jackson, that were just solid Bills, solid Bills. And it's all about the stuff on the field for the most part, but I think a lot of it has to do with off just as much as on. So thank you to those guys. I'm really excited to see what this offseason materializes into. I think that Brandon Beane put himself in this situation. I will say that. And that can't be overstated enough by me. This would not have had... Jordan Poyer would have finished his career here. Micah Hyde would have finished his career here. Mitch Morse would have finished his career here. Tremaine Edmonds, more likely than not, probably would have been re-signed had it not been for the Von Miller contract. I'll go back to that. That $25 million a year deal, essentially, was a shot in the foot by the Buffalo Bills. Whether Von Miller had stayed healthy or not, these decisions would have still had to have been made, in conjunction with having one of the best quarterbacks in the world. But at least That guy is one of the best in the world. Von Miller is the worst contract in the league. And yes, it got restructured. They were able to clear cap. His base salary is 1.5 this year. His bonus is 7. Cleared only 8 million though this year, and it's just a mess. Next year they'll have to restructure. They'll turn next year into whatever. And God willing, I hope there isn't a next year for Von Miller in terms of being on the Bills. I hope after this year he's retired and done, and they don't have to worry about it anymore, and they can just move on as one of the worst deals, maybe the worst free agent signing the Bills have made in my lifetime. And yeah, he had 8 sacks in 11 games or something like that prior to the devastating injury in Detroit that he suffered. And I'm not trying to hate on the guy too much. He suffered a horrible injury, but I more so hate the contract. I hated it when it happened. I liked the player, but I didn't like the contract. And I didn't think it was needed. You got to look at, when you sign a player like that, you got to look at what it does to stop your ability from re-signing the players that you do need to re-sign in the future. What is that deal going to do to stop us from re-signing Tremaine Edmonds? What is that deal going to do to stop us from re-signing AJ Epinesa? What is that deal going to do to potentially stop us from re-signing Greg Rousseau or somebody like that? All those things are realistic. It's not a crapshoot saying that or shot in the dark that they might lose Epinesa. They might lose Greg Rousseau next year. Epinesa this year, Greg Rousseau next. They might. They could. And a lot of it has to do with the horrible contract that wound them up with Von Miller. Tre White, they move on. They could cut him and move on. But there's going to be some dead cap hit this year. Not that much savings. And you got Diggs on the books still. You paid Dawson Knox elite tight end money when then you drafted a guy that is simply better than him in Kincaid. So some curious moves in the last couple of years that led to this, and they cannot be glossed over. But at the same time, these were the guys to cut. These were the guys to move on from in this situation. So there you have it. That's my take on what is one of the biggest days in recent Buffalo Bills history from a roster standpoint of moving on, releasing players. I remember, I don't remember the year off the top of my head, but I remember Andre Reed, Thurman Thomas, and Bruce Smith were all cut in the same day. I do remember that. I believe, it was in 2000, February 11th, 2000. Andre Reed was cut first. Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas were cut at the same time. Same day. So those are 3 Hall of Famers cut in one day. Eventual Hall of Famers, of course, cut in one day. Bruce would finish his career with the Washington Redskins, and I'll say it because that was their team name. Thurman Thomas went to Miami. Andre Reed went to Washington with Bruce as well. And that was it. But I find it funny, no player played more snaps, more games, more years than Andre Reed out of those 3 guys, oddly enough. A lot of that had to do with Thurman's knee injury, and a lot of that had to do with, Bruce getting injured and stuff here and there. But I find that pretty unique. I didn't realize that until I looked that up one day. But those were 3 future Hall of Famers, 3 then captains of the team, and the Bills, 24 years later, cut 3 captains. I don't know if those guys will be in the Hall of Fame. I doubt it. But what I do know is that they meant a hell of a lot to the Buffalo Bills for the majority of the time, if not all the time, that they were here. So thank you to Jordan Poyer. Thank you to Micah Hyde, who I'm assuming is either testing the market or will be retired in short order. I don't know if the Bills are bringing him back. I haven't heard anything about that. Neither is anybody that is, more informed than even myself. Tre White, it's a sad end to the first draft choice of Sean McDermott's time here in Buffalo, who did a lot to show up and show out at an early age, covering the wide receiver ones across the NFL as a rookie to become one of the best corners in the league. So Mitch Morse helping Josh, being that cog in the O-line for Josh from his rookie year till now, essentially, for the most part. And we move on. It's part of sports. It's part of year-to-year changes. Every year is a new year. That's why these playoff losses are just as crushing as the last, because you know that the team will always change year to year in some form or fashion. We'll never have the same team. Those days are over. That's why, in large part, the Bills were able to go to 4 Super Bowls in a row. There was no free agency at the time until 95, 96. Bills went to the Super Bowls in 90 to 93. So that's why those teams were able to be so good. They couldn't go, the players couldn't go anywhere. So outside of being traded, which that didn't even happen as much. So thanks to Reggie White, here we are in the salary cap era, free agency era, more so than anything. Teams have more money to spend now than ever, thanks to Taylor Swift. And we move on. All right. With that being said, I'm Ryan Thomas. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Great show. Thank you for all your comments. And onward and upward, a huge day in Buffalo sports. Sabres trade Casey Middlestat to Colorado for a guy that has the biggest, what do they call that when it's two letters that are the same? I can't even think of it right now. I'm so shot. Bowen Byram. What a name. Buffalo's defenseman Bowen Byram. And a lot of people in hockey love the trade, by the way. So there's people that I know that hate it, that loved Casey Middlestat. I love Casey Middlestat, to be honest. I thought he was finally turning a corner as a Sabre, but it was time for him to get a new opportunity. He was kind of the odd man out at center for Buffalo, which they're deep at that position. And they needed another defenseman. Connor Clifton ain't cutting it. Eric Johnson, he ain't cutting it. Those guys are more likely than not. Johnson, at the very least, he's going to get traded. Okposo could be on the move. Gergensons could be on the move. So plenty to discuss there as well in the coming days as this weekend finishes out at the NHL trade deadline. That was just one domino to fall for the Sabres. And just when the Sabres thought, we'll take the headlines today, the Bills said, hold my beer. Brandon Beane said, take my blue light. Take my Labatt. Watch what I do next. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.